Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm sitting here at a park, lovely park, just outside of Derby on the UK speaking tour. And it's kind of appropriate that I'm sitting here like a newsreader in the open. Good evening, here is the news. Because in the last few days, we have seen more blatantly than almost ever before the grotesqueness, the spineless, gutless cluelessness of the mainstream media, with honourable exceptions, but not many. The Videocast last week, I asked the question, who runs the world? And I answered it with psychopaths and liars. I think the last week has confirmed that pretty comprehensively. But you can only lie pathologically, as these people do, if you have an unquestioning, pathetic, childlike, corrupt, clueless media. Because this is how journalism should work. I'll have to remind these people, because they've obviously forgotten, even if they ever knew. A journalist's job is to take what authority says and to question it, to investigate it, and see if it stands up to scrutiny. In short, to see if they're telling the truth. But that's not how the mainstream media work. They take the official version of everything, even the most blatant lies about chemical attacks on videos that were akin to a school play in terms of their credibility. You take that official version, nonsensical as a child could see it is, and you repeat it to everybody as if it's true. Not only that, you abuse and ridicule those real journalists, the few, shockingly so, who are willing to ask questions and make points that any journalist worth the name would make by reflex action. But what we have is a mainstream media, and I worked in it for years up to the end of the 1980s, in newspapers and radio and television. And I tell you, you don't have to be intelligent to be a journalist. In fact, it can be a bad career move. What you do have to be is unquestioning and incredibly malleable in your integrity. So what we have in the mainstream media, systematically, are a few that know they're lying to you, that know they are telling a fake story to sell a fake invasion or a new fake reason for transforming society in a particular way. And then you've got the probably equally few who have some idea of the fact that it's all lies, but they keep quiet because they wouldn't be journalists in the mainstream for very long if they told the truth or questioned the lies of authority. And in the middle are the vast majority of journalists who call themselves journalists, who are utterly bewildered, have no other sources of information than what they get from the authorities and the mainstream sources, and they are repeaters. They are repeaters of propaganda, and they call it journalism. And so we've had this situation this week where more than 100 missiles were targeted at Syria by the psychopaths in America and Britain and France, on the basis of nothing more than fake videos, and I'll say what I mean by that in a minute, put on social media. And I hear this this phrase they use now, you know, when another buzzwords come in, it's open sources. Our intelligence has come from open sources. Well, of course, what they mean by open sources is social media. And terrorists and front people for the West on the ground. When I had a conversation, a bizarre one, a few weeks ago with a Leicestershire police officer who said he worked for counter-terrorism, he said to me about open sources. And what he meant was, I read it in the paper. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. Now, proper journalists would have this stuff for breakfast, dinner, and tea. But they don't, because their jobs depend on the fact that they don't. So, they cannot ask themselves a simple question which opens the door to everything. Who benefits? There's an old saying. He who benefits from a crime is the one most likely to have committed it. So who benefits from a chemical attack in Douma in Syria at a time when Assad was right on the brink of removing terrorists from that area, and is on the brink of winning the war with Russian support against the Western-backed, funded, armed, trained terrorists that they've been using to try to regime change in Damascus. How could Assad benefit mainstream journalists? Sorry, I used the word journalists, I'm sorry. Mainstream repeaters. How could he benefit from that? When it was obvious that something like that would be used as an excuse for the psychopaths of the West to start firing missiles at Syria and further demonize Assad. So there's no benefit to him whatsoever. And say what you like about Assad, he's not an idiot. So who does benefit? Who does benefit from the psychopaths of the West firing 100+ missiles at Syria, further demonizing Assad and pushing again for intervention in Syria? The very terrorists who produce the evidence that Assad was responsible, indeed that there was even a chemical attack. It's a very simple process, a very simple technique, which I gave the name to back in the 90s, problem, reaction, solution. You create the problem or the perception of one. You tell the people the version of that problem you want them to believe, and then you openly offer the solutions to the problems you have created, or the perception of problems that you have created, in this case, firing 100+ missiles at Syria. And we've seen this process again and again, problem, reaction, solution, and in this case too, no problem, reaction, solution. Most classically with Tony Blair and George Bush and Colin Powell. They call him Colin because he's full of shit. In the invasion of Iraq that started this catastrophe going in the Middle East on the basis of a pack of lies. So Colin Powell sat before the UN and told them that there were all these chemical weapons and what have you, a load of old crap. Media, oh yeah, that Saddam Hussein, he's got his weapons. Same with Blair, same with Bush. And then it turns out, as some of us were saying at the time, that it was a pack of lies just to justify an invasion of Iraq. And the media then saw that that was the case, that there was no weapons of mass destruction at all in Iraq. But then, when the same authorities start to demonize Gaddafi in Libya and Assad in Syria, all that stuff about Iraq is forgotten. And they're all on board again. Do you know, I was reading this week that the New York Times has not opposed a single war that America has embarked upon in 30 years. Because what happens, because of this web I talk about, where these media organizations at the deep level are attached to the same web as the governments and the military, once they want to demonize a country preparing for regime change, they have to soften up public opinion as best they can to get support for it, or at least stop significant challenge to it. And so the media go about demonizing these countries and these leaders by basically lying. And anyone who gets in the mainstream media and starts telling a different narrative and making points that they don't want people to think about, well, they're cut off, never to be seen again. We've had two perfect examples this week. One of them was the former commander of UK armed forces in Iraq, who was being interviewed on Sky News and started asking the questions, the obvious questions, the questions that I've just been asking. Why would Assad do it? There is no benefit for him whatsoever, and every negative consequence possible. Why would he do it? What happens? He's cut off mid-sentence by the presenter, quite blatantly. And they went on to another item, because he was speaking outside the narrative that the public are supposed to believe. Then we had a guy called Admiral Lord West, former First Sea Lord and chief of the Navy. And he was being interviewed. I've got a dog coming to see me now. Hello. He was being interviewed on BBC News, and he was saying the same thing, because it's obvious. What has Assad got to benefit from doing this? And the brainless newsreader, BBC journalist, it says on her tax form, asked him, but if you're saying this openly, aren't you helping Putin, because we are in an information war with Russia? Note, that was the word she used. We are in an information war with Russia. We? You're supposed to be an independent journalist, woman. But no, that's not how it works. It's we against whoever the government and those in authority seek to demonize. So people who have made the points, Russians have made the points, people like me have made the points, many people have made the points now, because it's so obvious that this attack was staged to be what I would call a problem, no problem actually, reaction solution to justify the bombing of Syria. And this is a newspaper here this week who called that claim comical. Claims that UK fake Syria gas attack are comical. What's comical is the inability to see that this is happening all the time, to justify changes in the world and actions that would otherwise not be justified. And what is emerging now that journalists have been able to get in, some of them proper journalists, some of them not, into that area of Duma where this attack was supposed to take place, a very clear theme is emerging about what actually happened. Doctors and witnesses, including children who were on the film being hosed down because of a chemical attack, have been saying that actually what happened was a bomb did drop, but it wasn't a chemical bomb. It was a bomb that caused an enormous amount of dust. And people were coming into the hospital because they were having difficulty breathing. They had an oxygen deficit. And others, it's emerging, were brought into the hospital, told they had to go there or told that there was food there if they went. And then, while they're there being treated or waiting for treatment for this dust problem and this oxygen deficit problem, the white helmets, who are Western-funded terrorists attached to the terrorists opposing Assad and only operate in their areas, white helmets who have been filmed picking up the body parts after the extremist terrorists have blown people's heads off. Members of the white helmets at the hospital shouted gas and chemical attack. And at that time, they grabbed the hoses and started hosing down the kids and hosing down people. And just by coincidence, nothing to worry about, there was someone there to film it. And that is the film. Was put on social media, open sources, that was used to justify, with no other intelligence, 100+ missiles, costing about $125 million, that they were then, as a result of that, unleashed on Syria. And those that have pointed this out, like I say, or asked for questions to be asked, have been attacked and demonized. There was a very good journalist, a very good mainstream journalist called Robert Fisk. He works for the Independent. It used to be a newspaper, now it's online. And he went to Duma and tried to find evidence that there was a chemical attack. And that's the story I've just told that he came across. And it's not been able to establish there was a chemical attack. But what is he labeled? Basically a tool of Russia and Putin. Because you have to demonize the truth to protect your stunning level of mendacity. We had on those films of this gas attack, as we have had so many times with the white helmets over the years, people in so-called protective gear, like a gas mask, to protect them from the chemical weapons and the fumes. And as experts in chemical weapons have said, if there was chemical weapons where they are, that gas mask would A, be useless, and they've got no other protection on their body, so they'd be dead. The white helmets have been caught faking attack situation after attack situation. Pictures of them, quote, treating children for sarin attacks with no protection. They'd all be dead, but they're not. Why? Because it's a fake. People lying on the ground after an Assad attack. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, look what's happened. Look what's happened. And then shortly afterwards, the same people are having selfies because it was all a fake. Corpses that open their eyes. God, that's a miracle. You have to believe in miracles to believe the white helmets. So, in so many ways this week, it's never been more extreme in its blatancy that governments lie on a level that beggars belief, well into the realms of pathological lying, which is a major trait of psychopaths. And nor has it been more extreme in its blatancy that the media are telling us a pack of frickin' lies day after day after day after day, and defending the pathological mendacity of governments. So Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition Labour Party, well, I use the word opposition very mildly because I watched the debate on Syria this week in the House of Commons, and any difference between the Conservative Party in government and the Labour Party in opposition was purely coincidental, apart from a speech which could have been far stronger, by the way, by Corbyn. But when Corbyn asked rightly what anyone should be asking, where's the evidence, A, that this chemical attack took place, or that Russia was responsible for the so-called nerve agent attack in Salisbury on the Russian agent and his former Russian agent and his daughter. He gets headlines like this: Corbyn, the Kremlin stooge, despises everything our troops stand for. As Corbyn defends Putin, again, whose side is he on? How about being on the side of the truth? Anyone ever thought in the mainstream media that might be a good thing? But no. Corbyn is asking questions. Like I say, he could be far stronger than he is, but it's welcome all the same. That mainstream journalists in their entirety should be asking. But what we get instead, I had to smile. Or was it a cringe? I think it was more of a cringe. When I read this in a newspaper called The Eye, what's this guy's name? Kim Sen-Gupia. And he says in the aftermath, breathe, Dave, breathe, you'll be fine. He says in the aftermath of this attack, alleged, last week, the US president told his commanders that he wanted to pull troops out of Syria as soon as possible. This is likely to have been viewed in Damascus as a signal of American disengagement and emboldened the regime to carry out the gas attack. No words necessary or possible. The fact that someone else could have done it, problem, reaction, solution, forget it. We're not even going there, because it's against the official line. And that's the interesting thing, you know, and the confirmation thing. You know, we have a newspaper in Britain called the Daily Mail, which is to the right. We have another one called The Guardian, which claims, laughingly, to be of the left. And yet, when it comes to something like this, they're all agreed that it's a good thing to bomb another country. And so what we've seen is not just Corbyn attacked, including by his own party, for asking obvious questions. And people like Admiral Lord West and the commander of British Armed Forces in Iraq, treated like that by the media when they're saying the, quote, wrong thing. we've also had the few journalists who are prepared to ask the right questions attacked and demonized as well for doing nothing more than basic journalism. There's one in America on Fox News called Tucker Carlson. Now, it's not often that Fox News and good journalism can be used in the same sentence, but with Tucker Carlson it can. He's someone who is looked upon by the other mainstream now as some kind of extremist, Putin-supporting apologist, when all he's doing is doing what journalists, proper journalists, once did in far greater numbers than they do now, which is to ask the questions. So he was asking the questions this week. How do we know that this chemical attack was done by Assad? What is the point of firing these missiles? What's the benefit for anybody? What's the benefit for America and all these other things that are basic journalism? And now, of course, he's a Putin apologist. And the reason they do this, and crucially, the reason that Facebook and YouTube, owned by Google, who are doing it through their search engine algorithms, are suppressing and censoring the alternative media, alternative opinion, and alternative information to the mainstream narrative. Reason Carlson gets attacked for asking basic journalistic questions. It's because it's all about controlling the narrative so you can control public perception and thus get justification, support, or at least not significant opposition to what you want to do. And it was as predictable, in fact more predictable than night follows day, that in the midst of this, RT, once better known as Russia Today, the Russian station funded by the Russian government, has been targeted by Ofcom, which is the, well, officially, right, it's the British government media watchdog. Yeah, sure it is. It's the media government media censor. It's already stopped the Iranian channel, Press TV, broadcasting in Britain because it was saying the wrong thing, in effect. And they're saying, oh, yeah, well, people are saying, oh no, that RT, it's a tool of Putin. Well, actually, it's called RT. It's called Russia Today. I mean, it gives it away just a little bit. Of course it's going to come from the Russian perspective. But the BBC comes from a neutral perspective. We are in an information war with Putin and Russia. CNN and MSNBC, New York Times, all these people, they come from a neutral perspective? Of course not. But the difference is, with Ofcom, if you're parroting the official line, you don't have to be neutral, because the official line is taken as the truth. So you're not being biased, you're just telling the truth. But if you question the official narrative, now that's bias reporting. This is how it works. And I just want to go through this little story here because it's so indicative of the bias and the claptrap and the bullshit that you get in relation to the media and government and government agencies. The headline is Russian TV, this is RT in the UK, Russian TV channel probe over bias in Skripal reports, this Salisbury incident. And it goes on. Kremlin-backed television channel RT is being investigated amid claims it has flouted broadcasting rules 7 times with biased coverage of the Salisbury nerve agent attack. Now, is it biased coverage when you question the government's official story about this, which is also unraveling by the day, Or is it biased coverage when the mainstream media and mainstream television and radio in Britain just repeat that official story without question and ridicule and dismiss anyone who does try to question it or cut them off? No, you can't be biased when you're telling what the government says. RT, formerly Russia Today, is accused of breaking Ofcom's impartiality regulations, I love it, over last month's poisoning of ex-spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter, Yulia. The watchdog, censor, could strip the channel, described as a loosely disguised arm of the Russian state, of its license, just like it did with Press TV in Iran, if it is found to have broken UK rules. What are those rules? You're questioning the official narrative. Okay, gotcha. In the clips under investigation, RT presenters and interviewees repeatedly deny Russia's involvement in the Salisbury attack. So that is bias. But the rest of the mainstream media, in terms of broadcast, that comes under Ofcom, is not being biased by repeating unquestioningly, with no other point of view, the official story from the government that what happened in Salisbury. The hypocrisy is a stench that needs a bloody gas mask to survive. They also say the West's attacks, this is RT say, the West's attacks on Syria were a choice. Blimey, that's controversial, isn't it? Did they just happen then, or did someone choose to send those missiles? And insist there was no evidence of chemical weapons being used by Syria's dictator Assad. The assertions were left unchallenged. But the assertions by the rest of the mainstream media that there was a chemical attack and Assad did it, that's fine with Ofcom. Ofcom yesterday said, with its nose in the air, it had a duty to ensure organisations that hold a licence to broadcast in Britain operate in a fit and proper manner. Ofcom said that it is understood to be concerned that the fact that RT did not offer alternative arguments when covering events such as the chemical weapons attack in Douma, Syria this month, and you know, obviously the Salisbury attack, that there wasn't alternative arguments put. Where's the alternative arguments in the mainstream media questioning Salisbury and questioning the chemical attack? Next to fricking nowhere. And if they are raised, then people are cut off, or it's indicated by we are in an information war with Russia, BBC so-called journalists, that maybe the person saying it, even though he is a former First Sea Lord, might be giving help to Putin. Where are you, Ofcom? In one clip on RT, ex-MP George Galloway interviewed Steve Topple, a journalist from a left-wing website, about the Skripals. Mr. Topple said, "I don't want this situation where the media is so terrible and so full of sewage all the time that people have to turn to the likes of his website to see what is happening." Well, that's highly controversial. That is absolutely, there should be an Ofcom investigation. And of the Salisbury attack, Mr. Galloway said, nobody died, nobody was assassinated, and the jury is out on who did it. There is an Ofcom investigation about bias on the basis of that. No one did die. No one was assassinated. In fact, there was miraculous recovery by the daughter so far from a chemical attack that's supposed to be absolutely lethal. And the jury is out on what happened, because no evidence has been produced to show what happened in terms of the government's narrative. RT guest David Morrison, described as an independent researcher, claimed the perpetrator must have been an enemy of Putin. Well, that's his opinion, and he's a right to have it. And in another clip, finally, RT presenter Peter Lavelle said the airstrikes in Syria were theatre, adding, "I think it was a political attack. I think it was theatre." There's an Ofcom investigation into someone's opinion on the basis of the evidence he's looked at. No. Ofcom is an arm of government, it's a censor of government, and it's just another example of how the narrative is being protected by ever more extreme levels of censorship. And it's clear from the events of this week, the events of this week alone, never mind all the other evidence piling up day after day before that, it's clear that those who run governments and tell us what to believe about world events are psychopaths and liars, and that those in the mainstream media who sell that calculated mendacity are a disgrace to the very name journalism, and are fundamentally important, bottom line important, in allowing the psychopaths and liars to get away with their psychopathic behavior and their lies. And I say this to them: your children and spineless, clueless, gutless mainstream media are going to have to live in the world that you are fundamentally helping to bring in by your behavior. You may not disgust yourselves yet, but the day is coming when even you will have to look in the mirror and realize the catastrophe that you have fundamentally played a part in making happen.